Welcome to the Max Life Show. We're here on site at the Maximize Living Experience. One of our guest speakers this weekend is Jamie Clarke. I wouldn't even try and duplicate what you could say about what your background is, what you do around the world. So would you mind sharing with our audience about a little bit about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Well, without being braggadocious, my
Go ahead and be braggadocious.
A little braggadocious. Yes, I'm going to brag a lot. Not really. I've spent 25 years as a professional adventurer, and I've had occasion, great fortune really, to travel all over the world to pursue something that I love, which is adventure as a whole, but climbing mountains in particular. Where I come from in Canada is just outside of the Canadian Rockies in a town called Calgary. And as a young boy, I grew up with exposure to the mountains and a love of travel, and I've been able to take that passion, recreation, and turn it into a profession. So that's the background. And I guess the hit list of things, I've climbed the 7 summits, Everest a couple of times. I've made some films with National Geographic, rode camels across deserts. Just try to fill my life with adventure, and not just as the physical backpack wearing, but adventure in my backyard with my family. I have 2 kids and been married pushing 17 years. And so just trying to live life as a grand adventure, period, no matter what it happens to be.
That's a great message. Our thing with the Max Life is obviously people are where they're at in their health, their career, and they've been called likely to something more. And you're obviously always stretching it a bit, looking for that next great adventure, looking for that next thing to overcome. So what would you say to somebody who, right now they don't think that there's that much more out there for them? So many people just think they're stuck. I know even the way we started Maximize Living is I loved what I was doing, but I felt there was more. And then so I had to take that first step. So for me, it was writing a book, and I had to convince myself to take 30 minutes a day and at least start writing, because I've been thinking about it for 5 years, and finally did it. And then it launched this whole new platform around the world. But I could have denied that and still be in the same place I was 15 years ago. So what would you say to people to get them moving?
Well, and I think congratulations on the book. I've written a couple, and it's grunt work. And there is a very interesting transition that needs to occur between talking about something and doing it. And you'd think that was easy. Well, actually, it's easy. It's just extremely difficult. It is very, very, very difficult. And I think your analogy that you make there is one of that's excellent in terms of the discipline that's required to write a little bit every day. And I think it's often, if you think of climbing Mount Everest or monstrous achievements in your life, you often look at them and they become daunting because in their enormity and their totality, they are monstrous. But if you do break it down, if you think, I gotta write a 70,000 word book, my God, you bang your head. But if I want to bang out 1,000 words a day, I can start getting somewhere. And even if they aren't the best words, and verbs aren't conjugated perfectly, and it doesn't just triple out of your mouth perfectly, it gets you rolling, and then you get to work on it. So I think ultimately, your point being about break that big thing down, but that's very simple, and then just try to be consistent in the execution. But I think the real thing that I've learned at a much deeper level is that we are more courageous than we think. And tapping into one's courage is, I think, a very difficult process. And courage and curiosity, I think, are combined. As a young kid, you're curious constantly. You're shoving things in your mouth because you want to experience them, and your mouth is one of these great indicators of what's around you. And hopefully you don't do much of that anymore, but as a little kid, you're curious. But over time, that curiosity gets beaten out of you, because naturally your parents don't want you to get hurt, so they're, be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful. And I think we hear that, be careful, be careful. And when we're overly careful, we don't give ourselves the chance to grow. And trying to fight that over time, at least for myself, was to be able to remember that I am more courageous than I think. Big things can be broken down into small steps. And then I just have to be dogged in my determination.
Yeah, and that's something you mentioned there about kids putting stuff in their mouth. So my kids all did that. Like if you left them alone for 5 minutes, they'd be dead because they would have put something like a paper clip in their mouth or the whole stapler or whatever. And so there's a point there where, like for my son, he doesn't want to do certain things because, I've never done that before. So what if I failed at it? And so there's this lesson we have to keep teaching them. And when we hear that, we're like, well, now you're really doing it, because you have to see that, hey, it's okay to fail. And we actually say on the show, we say, fail big, but fail forward. So what has been your experience? I've got to imagine you've thrown yourself into some pretty rough situations, and maybe it hasn't always worked out, but there's still an adventure.
Well, that's a good point. It's still an adventure, but I think if you look at my life, really, under smart analysis, you'll see that it is probably just one big failure. Like when you statistically, if you broke it down, it's failure, 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 success, failure, 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 success, failure, failure, sort of a success. Oh, more failure, failure, failure. But at an early age, I began to become comfortable with that and realized that that was the only way that I could succeed. I also realized that I wasn't necessarily a great climber. I climbed with some fantastic athletes, and I knew that I just didn't have the physiology that they did. I work hard, don't get me wrong. I had the commensurate skills, but there are that magic difference between those athletes that just, it's mind-blowing what they can do, and I have a great appreciation for it. I knew that wasn't me, but I didn't mean that that had to rule me out. So what I began to look at, well, what are the clusters of my skills? And maybe they are mediocre, but they are skills. And I realized that I need to be a good climber, but I also needed to be a good business person, because my great climbing friends were living in a van down by the river, living hand to mouth. Just amazing athletes, but just unable to barely feed themselves. So I figured, well, if I could figure out the business of adventure and simultaneously also be able to adventure, albeit mediocre in either field, that the combination could be unique. And that uniqueness would allow me to leverage an extraordinary life experience. So I think it was twofold. One, is knowing that failure really is the DNA. It's the building blocks. You have to fail smartly. You don't want to do stupid things, right? You have to be thoughtful about the risks that you take, but man, you have to take them. And then really being thoughtful about how can I, even if they are mediocre skills like they are in my case, combine them in a unique way. And it's that uniqueness that will allow you to leverage a greatness in your life.
There's that calculated risk, and then there's learning. So to somebody like you, it's like I'm just learning here. I'm not failing. This is all, I'm getting better, I'm learning, I'm figuring out my space, and even through that process, there's the idea that, man starts and the destiny is revealed to him. You get going, you begin to learn, hey, I could really do something unique here. Because for me, a lot of it was athletics. So I was trying to make the Olympic wrestling team, and unfortunately, I had the same people you had to deal with, those great athletes that are just freakishly awesome, and that you just can't quite do what they can do. But I ended up being their doctor. So we've been going to Olympics as the team chiropractor now since 1996. And so I've been to multiple Olympics where I probably would have never made it as a wrestler. Turns out that knowing wrestling, knowing what they go through, getting a degree in nutrition, getting my degree in chiropractic, I could work with these guys and go to, I've been to a dozen world championships, all kinds of national championships, all kinds of places. I never would have made it as a wrestler. But I really wouldn't have figured it out if I wasn't willing to throw myself into the fire there and keep, again, moving forward.
That makes sense to me now, because I know of you that you're doing your degree in psychology, and now you're going to be a triple threat. Teach me how to eat, teach me to keep my body working, and teach me what to think.
Exactly, and that's the same thing. You figure out that, hey, there's a thinking element to being healthy that I have to overcome, and so back to school, get my master's.
Good for you. And that's a perfect example of it. But you had the dream of wanting to compete in the Olympics, but understanding then, being really honest with yourself about what my skills and weaknesses are, and then trying to combine those skills in a unique way and still live this life as an adventure.
Yeah, and it is an adventure. I see a lot of people who don't like to move, like even move houses or move jobs or move cities. And a friend of mine who's very successful, and now he's, I think, in Japan or Russia, somewhere working, and I asked him, I said, what does your family think about it? It seems kind of stressful, all the moving around you do. He says, oh no, it's a big adventure, and that's their attitude about life, and so they've really made it work for them. Right. So question, just because, again, us normal folk don't get to be where you've been. So what is it? Give us one or two of just the coolest places the rest of us couldn't imagine having visited, and what it was like to adventure there.
Well, probably the easy one and kind of the no-brainer answer to that question is Everest. And not because it's just Everest, because I think to a certain degree the currency of adventure on Everest has been devalued, in part by the hordes of people and some of the commercialization and strange things going on there. But that experience for me was probably the great one, because it was, as a young boy, I grew up in Canada where hockey's pretty popular. Canadians watching, you'll agree with me. I wanted to play hockey, but my mom thinks hockey's a dangerous and violent sport. So she suggested I be a mountain climber. Thinking I wasn't going to fall through with it, I guess, because I'm like, Mom, mountains are dangerous too. But they're not violent, baby, it's the violence. So as a young boy, I had this dream of initially being a hockey player, but my mom, through books and reading and teaching, said, maybe she wasn't keen for the violence of the game. And to this day, I thank her for that kind of mentorship, although it bothered me at the time, because I fell in love with mountains through the books that she had given me in the beginning to distract me from hockey. And so climbing of Everest was that childhood dream, that 13-year-old boy who reads these books and decides at the kitchen table over some, of mom's fresh baking, thinking, I'm going to climb Mount Everest. And it struck me at that moment in my life, well, why shouldn't I? I mean, I was young enough, naive enough to believe that my dreams were possible. I really did. Yet I was smart enough intellectually, had enough horsepower to understand the enormity of the goal. And then I just set myself in motion to pursue that. And it was filled with all sorts of setback and miserableness along the way, but I was very lucky, albeit hardworking, and I was able to do that. And so when you arrive at the summit, which is not much bigger than it's the same size of the chair on which you and I are sitting, to finally arrive at that place after I had tried 2 previous times and failed, after I went through all the dark times where you think, I can't do it, I won't be able to find the sponsors, government officials cutting you off, storms blowing you off the mountain. Yeah. It was almost as though all those terrible things had to happen, because when it did happen so that we could succeed, the appreciation was so much greater. Not like you want to make your life difficult, but when you struggle to get something, it's like, I really appreciate this. So that moment on the summit for me was one, not of conquer, like you might think of in climbers, where they get to the summit and pump a fist. Yeah. That for me was a moment of peace. And I hadn't really even realized that peace existed. It was, for me, the absence of struggle. There was no more up, literally and figuratively. And to just be in that moment. Wow. I don't know any other way. I mean, words fail me, but ultimately it was a sense of peacefulness. And one that hasn't faded with time. I would think, what was it like up there? I could talk to you about it for hours like it was yesterday. Wow. So that for me was just this enormous sense of peace and well-being.
Well, 2 last things. I know you got to go get ready for your talk at ML Experience
right,
here.
I'm excited. Team group, I'm fun.
You're going to have fun with us. We're going to love you. 2 things. So you mentioned something you said is it's like all the storms and bad things had to happen for me to get there. And I think that's really what most people's lives are about. They don't realize that they're praying for their foundations to stop shaking, only to realize that it's God that is shaking them. That you're being shook up so you will actually get somewhere. Yeah. And that it really is, we look at any given moment, which I'm sure there's times in that mountain, there's been times through all those sort of setbacks you experienced where it seemed like, well, it's all against me, it's over. And yet they really were just things strengthening you, causing you to prepare more. And then what they show in what they call positive psychology is that it's during times of stress and strain, and while your fingers are freezing on top of that mountain trying to get to the next level, that you're actually experiencing life to its fullest, and you're truly satisfied, which is a better term than happy, because you could eat a Happy Meal and think you're happy, but ultimately it doesn't make you happy. Yeah. So same thing with the opposite, where here's something hard like practicing the violin, climbing a mountain, and it's difficult, but you're totally engaged, it's satisfying, and you're able to do something great with your life. And so that's one thing I want you to kind of encourage people here in a moment. And the second thing is obviously physically being healthy. So Maximize Living is a health organization, and you must do some things with your body intelligently to be able to succeed. And we really believe that's, with everybody's success as a family person, as a business person, a ministry person, whatever your career is or whatever your goals are, you really got to fuel yourself with well-being. So if you can comment on those 2 things to kind of bring us home here.
Well, you're speaking, I'd love to hear that, because it's not, I don't hear it very often, and the first part of that question I'm a big believer of, so you're preaching to the converted in that regard. And maybe let's start with the end. But speaking of health and wellness, I learned as an athlete that you can be very, very fit, but particularly unhealthy. And often, in order to have a high level, like you as a wrestler, in those trials for the Olympics, you are actually an unhealthy specimen of a human being. You are compromised, your immune system. You are on the verge of injury, because to reach that incredible peak performance of fitness, you do compromise your health. And so I learned to differentiate the 2. and learned that a big expedition like Everest, a month and a half in the field, would require not just incredible fitness, but instead of a sharp blade that comes of that acute level of fitness, you needed this sort of hammer of good health to get the job done. And it took me years to figure the difference. And I can tell you, of all the things in my life that I've experienced, having traveled around the world and become a father and run business and having that, there is no greater gift that you can bestow upon yourself other than health. Because it is through health, and now I'm preaching to you, and you get it, it's through health that it manifests everything. The love of my wife and my children, right? The work that I do, the leadership of it. If the health isn't there, and this is particularly acute to me, and I owe a great debt to my personal chiropractor. I took a big fall years ago, injured my back, and it manifests itself today, and I'm still working away. I had an episode on the 9th of December, so quite recently. My chiropractor came to my home, and I couldn't roll over in bed, and he just slid his hands, and this was quite excruciating. He slid his hands and just felt my spine. I couldn't even roll over, and I was peeing in a bottle. I was not, for 7 days I was in bed.
Wow.
And he came to my home, and multiple times, and just talking me through it, the mental part, as you said, because I was terrified and upset and depressed and sad, because I attach much of my life to health and wellness, and there I am. Luckily, my wife and kids were fantastic, would come and lay with Dad and stuff. But my chiropractor came to my home and just slid his hands under, and okay, that's it for today. Came back the next day. That's it for today. Came back the next day. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you without the care of that guy. Yeah. So health is an incredibly important thing, and to see people die on a mountain, to have compromised my own, it's I can never remind myself enough. So keep up the good work. So that's just so important to anything that I've ever done. Without this health and well-being, you can't do amazing things. You can't tap into what is this amazing opportunity that many of us have, which is our lives.
Yeah.
And then speaking of your first question, which was what?
It was more of a comment, but I think it'd be great for you to teach. Is when you had mentioned earlier that that really all those storms were necessary.
I just got all emotional thinking about blaming it. Speaking of a storm, So you're right. I guess this is the funny thing about a positive attitude, and maybe this is different from you, but for me on an expedition, if you have a person who's walking around, oh, everything's fantastic. No, sometimes things are terrible.
Yeah.
And if you walk around just because the affirmation you put on your bathroom mirror says you're a happy, healthy person, and you walk around believing that, I understand where that's coming from. I get the intention. You got to take action and do things. And sometimes life is just miserable. It just is. Yeah. And I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at it and going, this sucks. Like at pretty much every level that I'm looking, and I'm getting kind of grumpy about it, but this is really a bad situation. Yeah. And it's okay to acknowledge that. I've learned that from being on the side of a mountain when the conditions are terrible and things are getting very risky, and you've got a climber on the team who's like, oh no, we can do it, everything's great. And you're like, dude, we may die, so you got to get in connection with reality here, and then we're going to figure out how we're going to solve the problem. So there's this balance about being able to see that it's realistic, but never abandoning this belief, this hope really is what it is, that you will find a way through. And I think you look back on your life and your previous experiences build your confidence, the memory of those successes. And I can't imagine until the day I take my last breath that I will ever lose that hope that there's just some way to work around things. And when you do, it builds more confidence, and you do it again and again. And even though it is miserable, in the back of my mind, which is what I think buoys my spirit, I know I'm getting better. I know I've never hurt like this, I've never struggled like this, I've never been more filled with doubt. And then I'm thinking, yeah, this is it. This is here. In a tent inside of a mountain, throwing up out the vestibule, and your gear's gone, and you're shivering with your buddy, and he smells awful, but you're cuddling him anyway. And you're like, this is miserable, but you're kind of on the inside smiling. This is it, man. This is life. We're living it here.
That's right.
20 years from now, we will forget the blue sky day when the snow is perfect, and remember that all. What we will remember is right here, right now, sitting here suffering together.
Yeah.
And so in a sick kind of way, I like that. I don't know, it's sick, it's demented, but man, that's where it is. And if you have that kind of bend in your attitude about, hey, this is tough, good.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, this is a great show. Thank you so much for coming on and for speaking to our guys today and helping everybody out there to lead a max life.